you have a biographical sketch, kind of like A to Z, Andy's life. Would you share that with us?
Sure.
Cool.
This is a little outline I did about my dad's life. First of all, I appreciate you guys all being here and all the support we've gotten. Sorry if I read from the page a little bit here for you, but I kind of like to give you guys that didn't know my dad a little bit of a closer look into his life. I know a bio is typically just the facts, when were you born and where did you live and where did you work and all that stuff, but didn't quite feel that would paint the right picture for you, so you'll have to bear with me as I embellish just a little bit. So I had an idea of what I would say about my parents and their life when I sat down to write this. I mean, I know my parents, right? Pretty straightforward. I knew the background. I'd heard all the stories. Usual middle-class life, or so I thought. And then I started talking with my mom the other night and asking her a few questions to kind of fill in the blanks in my own memory. Wow. Turns out my folks were a couple of crazy, live by the seat of their pants risk takers.
Go figure.
Yeah.
No.
They were
not surprised.
Two adventurers on an incredible journey of excitement with maybe just one or two decisions in there that drove their own parents a little bit crazy. Andrew J. Zarnicki, born February 3rd, 1943. My father was born in Hartford, Connecticut to Joseph and Romalda Zarnicki. His mother died of liver disease when he was 7 years old, and after his mother's death, his father sent him to live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin with relatives for a time. I've often thought about my father during this time of his life, being a young boy ripped away from those closest to him, and although surrounded by family, alone in so many ways. And I wish I could have gone back and hugged and comforted that sad 7-year-old who had lost so much. He was reunited with his dad and eventually wound up in Windsor Locks, Connecticut. It's there that my father met his bride-to-be, Sharon. He was 15 and she was 12. Jeez.
Scandalous.
One of my mom's first memories. Yeah. One of my mom's first memories of spending time with Dad was when my grandfather flooded the backyard in the wintertime and made an ice skating rink. The neighborhood kids would come over and skate. They had many great memories of a young adulthood with their good friends Ruth and Dick Hayes. They all did drum corps together, and my grandparents sacrificed a lot to make that happen. My mother twirled the baton, and my father played the trumpet and bugle. My mother will tell you that Dad was a little dense, and it took a bit for him to realize that she was interested in him. I, however, have seen plenty of pictures of my mom from that time, and I think he was more than aware of her, if you know what I mean. Both of my parents went to college, and there were times when they were distant from one another geographically, but always close at heart. Eventually, the inevitable happened, and Dad married Mom on July 31st, 1966. Life started in a small 8x40 trailer in Warehouse Point, Connecticut. Here begins the crazy gypsy adventure. My parents then moved out of the trailer into a 4-bedroom house they bought for $14,000. That house was sold, and there was another trailer in Storrs, Connecticut. My mom told me a story about an evening spent at their new trailer with their friends Dick and Ruthie Hayes, where they decided to do some redecorating for their bathroom. They made a, sorry about that. They made a hanging bead-type curtain to put in their bathroom, only they made it out of beans. That's right, beans. This involves uncooked beans, fishing line, a massive sewing needle, and pliers. My mom insists it was very beautiful. They then moved to an older farmhouse in Andover, Connecticut. It was in this house that my father got one of his biggest blessings. He was able to spend a year or so playing Mr. Mom with my sister, his daughter. Mom worked and Dad stayed at home, And Mom says she couldn't stand it because she would come home and the baby was in a fresh new outfit, dinner was ready, and everything was completely organized. I guess he was a bit too good at that job for Mom. My father also gutted half of that house, and for a time, you could lift a plastic sheet that went right down the center of the house and look all the way up to the attic rafters and all the way down into the basement floor. So pause here. I thought I drove my parents nuts. I thought I was the only one who ever bounced around or did crazy things that my parents shook their heads at. I guess not. Here's where it gets real good. My dad's buddy Dick Hayes had moved out to Las Vegas, Nevada. He and my dad thought, how great would it be for Dad to pack up his whole family and move out to Vegas and start a cabinet-making business. Yep. So my parents, that's right, my parents, they bought a big old blue school bus. Dad cuts out all the seats in this school bus and runs a piece of paneling halfway down the middle. They load all their possessions in, chuck their baby in a playpen in the front of the bus, and drive out to Las Vegas. They got to Vegas and slept in their good friend Dick and Ruth's bedroom for a few months while they tried to find work and shelter of their own. Now again, I wonder if their parents were fully on board with this gypsy migration, or if maybe they were just a little less than pleased. There are many funny Vegas stories that time won't permit us to tell, but eventually a short or long, depending on who you ask, 18 months later, my parents came back to New England and briefly lived with my mom's parents before getting a house in Enfield, Connecticut. Some of you may know that I burdened my own parents by moving back in with them, but I guess it's just a family tradition. It wasn't long before I was born, and my dad used to say that he prayed to God for patience, and God sent him Joey. But indeed, we had a great childhood. Dad made it very special for us while we lived in Connecticut. Dad's work brought him to New Hampshire, where he was employed in the insurance industry. He worked as an independent adjuster and finally settled at Metropolitan, where he spent 22 years as a claims adjuster and supervisor. He had a great work family whom he appreciated, and from what I've heard, the feeling was mutual. Dad had just retired from work, and he was excited about life and the opportunities it was going to bring. The events of this past week were sudden, but Dad didn't experience much pain at all. Although for us it's hard, I wouldn't want it any other way for him. He was involved and at the top of his game, and that's how it should be.
I saw this calling hours at the funeral home the other night, and this was on his desk. Yeah, I hadn't seen this till last night. Okay, hold still, don't move. Maybe you got to read this if you visited last night, but let me read it for you if you didn't. You can use most any measure when speaking of success. You can measure it in fancy home, expensive car, or dress. But the measure of your real success is the one you cannot spend. It's the way your son describes you when you're talking to a friend. I thought how appropriate to have Joe help me with this. I thought you all would be much more blessed to hear Joe tell it, and we're going to invite others to share. But Joe, there is a biographical sketch, but I'd like for you to share. Tell us about him, but let me share kind of about you and him as far as for my own. The first time I met Joe, he showed up in church. Andy. I called him Andy, and I'll call him Andy Joe, and I so appreciate their relationship. But the first time I met Andy, he showed up at church, and as a pastor, hi, how are you, and who are you, where are you coming from, and what's your story? And I loved what he had to say. He actually had a church. He was good as far as the pastor is concerned. He's all set. He really wasn't looking for a church. It was very interesting. he was here for his son. And I thought, wow, that's what a pastor wants to hear. He'd come into church. I have no idea why he thought, anyway, but he apparently, and I'd like to hear from your end of it, but he ended up coming to church multiple times. I don't remember. Hoping Joe would show up. Tell me about what was going on the other side of that whole conversation.
Sure. There was, is this working? There was, quite a hurricane on the other side. There was a lot going on in my life at the time. Dad sensed and knew I probably needed a little support, more than he could probably give me. And indeed, I had expressed, a little interest in church. Maybe, the kids needed to go. Was my thing. And we did attend Dad's church, and that was fine. And for whatever reason, we in conversation we brought this church up, and it was probably some vague reference on my own part, but Dad kind of latched onto it, and next thing you know, well, I think I'm going to go to that church this next Sunday, and it was how kids often are.